Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and in this video we're going to be following on from last week's where we painted up a couple of marine miniatures for a Blood Angel Space Marine army by painting up a tank for that army. And I've chosen a Bile Predator, and Games Workshop sent me through the new Demos upgrade kit for that, and I've never painted a Bile Predator before, and it's pretty iconic, so this felt like a great opportunity to have some fun and paint one up. So we're going to take a look at translating that scheme from infantry onto a vehicle, what things we might change to achieve that, and always with that same view as when we were painting the infantry, that we want to really enjoy the process. This is a high-end army painting project, something we are going to game with, but something we want to be really proud of, we want to cherish, we want to enjoy looking at it on the shelf as much as looking at it on the table, but still being able to produce it in a decent amount of time. At the end of the video, we'll take a look back and see if we've achieved that. So let's paint. And before we get onto the actual paint itself, I wanted to address something that I've been coming up against recently, particularly on vehicle miniatures. And this is on the plastic sprues. On the larger panels and curved panels, these sort of swirls and shapes that we're getting in the plastic that you can see here. Now, I've done a little bit of research. I'm going to go away and see if I can find someone in the industry to talk to. But it seems to be referred to as things like orange peel or jetting or worm something. Can't remember. But yeah, these weird swirls. And the big issue is that when we paint them, they leave a texture that it's different. It's not a smooth surface when you lay the paint down on top of it. And I find it very frustrating, to be honest. And this Predator kit is probably the worst example of that I've come across so far. And all I've done, all I could think to do really to try and mitigate the issue was to sand it. So I've buffed the entire miniature with about 1500 grit, a mix of sort of 1000 to 2000 grit sandpaper. And then I primed it, and as you can see, it didn't seem to make any difference, which confuses me, to be honest, because, as I say, if it was a difference in finish to the plastic, then the sanding it hopefully sort of unifies it, but I guess not. And you can see that orange peel effect really starkly there on the side. But yeah, it's just something, I say, it's an issue, and it's something I want to learn how to mitigate, because it seems to be turning up quite often with these plastic kits. Now, with regards to paint, I've primed everything black, and sub-assemblies, I've left off the parts of the miniature that I'm going to paint with a black armour rather than red, because I want to look at getting that secondary colour in more on my vehicle model than I was able to on the infantry model. And black for me is always a brilliant secondary colour to use, particularly on a marine army, but generally it will go with everything. And we can obviously change the type of black. For this one, I'm going to go for a pretty neutral one. And black and red obviously is a known Blood Angels combo. But yeah, if you're ever wondering, then black works brilliantly equally. I think so does white. So over the primer, I've just sprayed them, base coated them with Vallejo Model Colour Black, because I like using that. And then to highlight them, I'm going to use Eshin Grey. Now, both these paints are fairly thick, so I have thinned them about 2 drops of thinner to paint. I'm spraying at about 20 to 25 psi, and I'm using a 0.4mm needle and nozzle, and I'm using our Harder and Steenbeck Signature Series Evolution for this video. And you can see for the highlight, I'm just sticking to the centre, as it were, of the cylinders as we look at them. And just a nice simple highlight, and I'm going twice to do it. And I will repeat that for all of the black parts of the miniature. Now, for the red scheme, we're going to largely follow what we did for the infantry, but here is the first sort of couple of changes. I wanted to push the shadows a little bit more, push that modulation a little bit more. We're going to modulate it panel by panel rather than that overall light source, because it's something I'm enjoying doing at the moment. There's lots of other styles and ways of doing it, which I'm sure I will cover on different projects over here on the channel. But what I'm going to do is, over that black primer, start to slowly build up using duraluminum here, brighter and brighter towards the centre of most of the panels. And you see, even with a metallic paint, we can still achieve that nice little bit of sort of colour gradient, as it were, with the silver over the black. And when I'm spraying with these Metal Colour series paints, I tend to put a little drop of Flow Aid into the airbrush as well. For me, it just helps them not bead up so much on the surface. You can see as I'm going in and reapplying it, we're getting that stronger, brighter silver towards the centre of those panels, but we've still got that nice little bit of it towards the shadows as well. And I just found that having this silver base coat under the red paint really seemed to help just give it a little bit of a lift when we did the infantry. So I saw no reason not to follow the same process for the vehicle. But again, the main thing to look at here is how we are creating that color, that modulation on the panels of sort of light and dark. It's looking pretty good, and it's worth, you know, taking your time with, because it will set the tone for the rest of the paint job. So already I think it's sort of looking quite interesting. We've just got our silver sort of pre-shade on the miniature there. And now I'm going to speed up and do the entire tank so you can take a look at how I've done the rest of it. But it is very simple. Nice base coat all the way around, not too solid, and then going back in and working each individual panel and getting brighter towards the centre of each. And I just want to take a minute to say thank you to those of you that support us over on Patreon. There's not many tiers or anything like that, and I think you guys seem to like it. We keep it quite simple. You support the videos over here each week, and you tend to get one a week over there from generally from Andy, doing more multi-video projects, 2, 3, 4, 5 part series over there. And because of your support, you've allowed us to grow. We're 4 years old today as of recording this, which is quite exciting. I don't think I'm going to do a social post or anything about it, but it's pretty cool, eh? And it's all thanks to you lot for your support. So we massively appreciate it. We really do, and we've no intentions of stopping. Andy's working on a lovely little Lumineth conversion at the minute. Another elf in pyjamas, which he's rather good at painting. So in the background, you can see here, we're nearly there. Obviously, this is sped up, just getting brighter and brighter towards the centre of each panel. You can see it already helps us identify those different shapes that are on the model. As I say, it's a style of modulation I'm really enjoying at the minute, and it's very different to what I've done for the last few years, so it's quite exciting and fun to paint like that. Now for the base coat, I'm going to use Corn Red. So this is an additional paint over the infantry. I didn't bother with this in the shadows for the infantry, but I felt with the larger surfaces on the vehicles, it would allow me the space to get a few more tones of red in there. So I've just given it base coat of corn there. And you can see in the shadows it is still a tiny bit sort of glittery from that silver paint showing through. But when we move in to do our next paint, which is Mephiston Red, you can see we start to get a more sort of smooth coverage, and it begins to really just block out that silver. But it just definitely gives it a little lift having that silver underneath. So it's not a candy scheme or a clear scheme or anything like that. It's just to give the paint a little lift. And nearly all of these reds that you're going to see me using, I'm thinning about 2 drops of thinner 2 paint. Still spraying exactly the same PSI, same brush, all the rest of it. And I'm just repeating the process, as you hopefully can see on screen, working towards the centre of the panels with a brighter or a lighter paint. And at each stage, for the Mephiston and for the next colour, I'm probably applying it at least twice, waiting for the previous stage to dry first, and just to see how strong that coat has turned out. You see the difference there next to just the corn red over the silver. So our final airbrush highlight is going to be Wildrider Red, to have this nice little sort of orangey nod to that classic Blood Angels scheme. As I say, these are not meant to be a direct copy of the old Blood Angels orange. It's just a little nod, really. And I think it's a Heresy. I mean, it's Heresy miniatures I'm using, but I don't know. I'm going to be using some 40k transfers in a bit, so I'm not quite sure what they are. But they're definitely Blood Angels. And I quite like it when you have something like the turret here, which you can take through to the completion each stage before going on to the main sort of body of the tank. Partly because if you muck it up, it's a much smaller area that you've got to fix. But the turret, particularly on the Demos Predator, is great because it's got all these shapes on, so it's lovely. So I had a quick check against the infantry miniature, see that we were on track, and very, very happy with that colour. And once I got all the red down, let it dry, and then give it a few coats of polyurethane gloss varnish. Now I've given the whole miniature some gloss varnish here. Normally I would just do the areas I was going to put the transfers on, but I wondered, there's an old military modelling trick where you can take floor polish, which is effectively really, really runny gloss varnish, and spray it over a model, and it sort of levels out any lumps and bumps. And I just wondered if it might have a similar effect if I did it with the polyurethane. It didn't. So still got all that orange peely texture on there. And then for decals, I just went through my folder. I really, really like this new Space Marine vehicle transfer sheet that you get in the Primaris stuff. I really like the transfers on there. They're decent quality, which is cool. I've got a few old ones there and the Heresy sheet as well. And then it was just a case of playing around, looking at old pictures for reference, old artwork and stuff. And I love that yellow as that sort of tertiary colour. We used it on the chainsword on one of those infantry miniatures, and it felt fun to try and get it in there a little bit with some decals on this. So once the decal work was complete, and I'll put a link up to the top to a video that's dedicated to working with them, it was time to go in with some oils. For this, I've chosen the same oil we used on the infantry. So this is Sepia by Abteilung 502, and I've thinned that down into a wash using just mineral spirits, just normal DIY store mineral spirits. If I was going to do this for my own sort of army project, I would use something like Sansador, which is a artist grade odorless spirit, but that's because it's nicer to work with. But I was only doing a little bit of it, dries quickly, so it's good for filming. And I've made up a wash, and you can see there on a piece of plastic card the consistency of the wash. So it's not a thick wash by any means. And it might mean I have to reapply it in a few of the recesses. And you can see there I just started off touching it to the rivets just to see how it was behaving. And once I was happy with it, I decided to cover the entire panel. And again, I'm not just slopping it all over. I want to work sort of panel by panel, quite calm, taking your time. You know, with oil paints, even with white spirits on, with oil paints, you've got loads and loads of work time to remove it and to change it and do whatever you need to do, so that there is no rush with this stage whatsoever. And you can see as I wash the entire panel and I start to get build up in areas, I'm using my brush and I'm drawing it top to bottom all the time, just to try and begin to create very, very subtle streaks in the back, sort of background, as it were, of the paintwork. And if I've got too much of the wash collecting in any of the recesses, I'm just wicking it up on my brush. Now, I had done the whole tank, and by the time I came back to the first panel, it was drying. Ideally, I would have it a little bit more dry than it is here, but I just wanted to add a little bit more sort of faint streaking. So this is sort of oil dot filtering, but it's not really. I'm not trying to filter the colour here. I'm just trying to put some lighter coloured streaks in. So I've used a little bit of faded dark yellow oil as well. And you can see I'm using a clean, soft brush here just to pull top to bottom. And what that will do is it will collect that sort of semi-dried paint that's around any of the rivets, and it will collect some of those dots that we've just put on and just start to create these lovely streaks on the model, showing a little bit of, you know, grime and so on and so forth. You know, this is a marine tank, and I don't particularly want it to be super rusty. I don't particularly want it to be really chipped up and damaged and everything, or severely chipped and damaged. So for me, this is a great step to add some life into that armour without having to really mess it up too much. The reason I'm showing you this bit of footage is the back door here, I'd only just finished doing the wash on, and it's still really wet. And you can see as you try and work and pull those streaks and stuff, what actually happens is you just wipe the paint off. Now, this is partly caused because, as I say, the oil is still too wet, but also because I've given the whole model that gloss coat. So it's harder for that paint to sort of stick and key itself to the surface. So it's a lot easier to just wipe it clean off. So that, combined with it being still very wet, the paint, I'm not really creating streaks here. I'm just smearing the paint around and wiping it off. So if you see this happening, just let it dry a little longer. You can get a hairdryer on it, but what I would say is when you've used a wash like this, quite a thin wash, and it's all over, if you do get a hairdryer on it, be careful you don't just blow it all around. And then what will happen is you will push all that pigment into the sort of corners, and you'll get build up of it, and it won't look that nice, and you won't have it on the surfaces. But you can see there, it's just nothing's really happening. You're just sort of smishing it around and not getting that desired effect. So just need to be a little bit more patient with that. Then once that was dry, and I think I left it overnight, but you'd be fine after about an hour. I'd have thought after an hour and a quick blast with the hairdryer, you'd be fine to do this with the Abteilung paints and the mineral spirits. I'm giving the miniature a matte varnish. For this, I'm using a Lucky Matte by MIG. This is because I wanted that slightly satin finish to the armour, like we did with the infantry. I wanted it to match. And unfortunately, you can see here, I hope anyway, as the light's sort of reflecting off, we can still see all of that orange peel texture and those swirls and stuff that were that were on there, and it is really disappointing. You know, I don't want to be negative on this channel. I don't want to whinge and all the rest of it, but it is a real shame when you're going to lavish this much care and attention, you know, albeit for an army paint job. It's just sad that you've got that on there. You know, these aren't cheap kits. You know, it took ages, an absolute pig to build this Predator. It's almost as bad as that Brutalis Dreadnought I did last year. I don't know whether I got a bad cast. Yeah, I don't know. It was tough. It was quite hard to stay motivated. Put it this way, if this had been a personal project, I'd have probably sacked it off at that point and gone and got a different kit. Because for me, is it worth putting all this care and attention and time into something? But I'm glad I continued because, you know, the painting's still the painting. Now, moving on to my favourite step, and this was a really nice way to sort of chill out again after being a bit disappointed, and that's chipping. Now, I am not a huge fan of sponge chipping. I think on most of the time it looks like you've just blatted a sponge all over the surface, but particularly for vehicles, I think it is a really good starting point for chipping, for giving you those sort of random chips. So I'm using here Yellowish Rust by Vallejo Model Colour Panzer Aces series. I'm just sort of focusing around the edges, more the edges than the centre of the panels, just thinking where would the damage occur, just doing a little bit of sponging just to get things started. But then the majority of the work I'm going to do with my brush here. And for this, it's simply a case of getting comfortable, got it on my wet palette, and I'm just working around more or less all of the edges, just sort of doing these tippy-tappy chips all the way along. Joining up some of those sponge chips we've done, creating new ones and scratches. This is easily the most time-consuming part of the entire process, but for me it's probably the most enjoyable, which is why I like to take my time doing it. And I felt it really worked with the look I was going for on this, that slightly more nod to that slightly more vibrant, slightly more 90s look to it. So for instance, if you compare it to when I did the Lehman Russ a few weeks back now, you can see the sort of subtle differences between the techniques and the stages that we've chosen have given us quite different looks. But I wanted that sort of semi-edge highlight effect on this model, partly because it would help it look a touch more orange. But yeah, just to make it look a little bit more like the older style of miniatures from the 90s and stuff. Then for the exhausts, I'm going to use two silvers here. I'm using, they're both dry brush paints by MIG, but they're absolutely beautiful to use. Really, really love these paints. I'm coming to rely on them a lot now. I've used the gunmetal, and then I've used the light metal here. And although I am using a dry brush to apply them, and they say dry brush paints, you know, they're pretty wet. And I've got a fairly wet brush here that I'm applying them with. It's just a nice wide brush to do it with. And then I'm going to use a technique here and some products. These are just washes here, purple, red and blue washes I'm using. And this is something I did years and years ago when I painted a super heavy, and I saw it used with inks in one of the Model Masterclass books as a way to sort of do some heat discoloration on the exhaust guards. And I thought could be quite good fun to do on the Predator. I'll be honest with you, the fact that all that orange peel stuff had happened, everything was kind of liberating in a way, because it just made me go, oh, do you know what, sod it, I'm going to try a few different things out here, throw them at the model, see what happens, which was quite fun. So we're just blobbing on little bits of the blue, then the red, then the purple, so just to create that discoloration from the heat. And also that the exhausts just were an absolute pig to put together as well. I think this mould must have slipped slightly because nothing seemed to line up properly. No matter what I was doing, I was ending up with these big seams without stuff joining up, which is frustrating, as I say, when you take your time to do the painting. But anyway, hopefully the other ones I've got in the boxes are better. Then for the actual exhaust part itself, I'm just going to do a sort of rusty exhaust. So I've base coated it using dark rust, and then I'm going to sponge highlight it, or sort of highlight it, not really highlighting it, just adding a different colour in. Using Mornfang, so a more orangey brown, so a darker orangey brown and a lighter orangey brown. And this is just meant to look like rusted up old steel pipes. Then pop them on to see where we were getting to, and actually you can see how quickly it comes together. Once that chipping stage is done, there's not a lot more to do. So although it takes a long time, it's a huge portion of the overall paint job anyway. And I was really happy at this point. I thought it was looking pretty cool. Certainly unlike anything I'd painted, which was great. For the assault cannons themselves, and this was a beautiful cast, this resin set of Iliastus assault cannons. I thought I'd use similar colours that I used on the exhaust shields. So I've gone for the blue and the purple here. So it was Tyran. Can't remember. You'd have seen the name on the pot. The brighter blue wash and then Trucchi Violet. And just going to spray those towards the ends of the barrels just to create a little bit of that heat bloom. I didn't want to go through sort of all the colours of the rainbow heat bloom, which is as fun as it is. I just didn't fancy doing it really. And then as another little nod to the older style, I thought I have to put a Pintle multi-melter on there and paint it yellow. Partly so we get more of that yellow in, as that tertiary colour, but also, you know, there's that amazing old Furioso Dreadnought with the yellow multi-melter. It's one of my best memories from second edition artwork and the miniatures. So just a Tamiya white base, nice bright white, whatever you fancy using. And then for the yellow, I'm using Bad Moon Yellow, which I used on the chainsaw of the infantry. But an additional step here is I'm going to use Nazdreg Yellow contrast paint painted on to just give it a little bit more about it, you know, a bit of definition. Basically acting like a wash. So this is probably watered down about 1:1. And I would do that if I was doing it on, say, a bolter casing or something like that as well. But the chainsword, because it was just a flat surface, it didn't really need that additional layer of interest to it. And then for the tracks, this is just something I'm having fun with at the moment. I did it on the Russ with some different paints, and I thought, I wonder if it'll work on here using contrast paint. So I've got brown contrast paint there, Garagax Sewer, and I'm going to mix in some brown pigments and some silver pigments, because I thought this will give me a very, very fine texture. Can I make it look like a sort of cast steel look to the tracks? I don't think it worked quite as well as when I used the normal acrylic paint rather than the contrast. I thinned it down a little bit there with some airbrush thinner, but it was fun to give it a try. And what I didn't want was quite such rusty looking tracks as I did on that Renegade Russ. So again, it was just a good opportunity to go, right, how can I make some interesting looking tracks for a marine tank without making it look too grotty and rusty? And actually, I do think they came out really, really nicely. And I've chosen to paint mine off the tank and glue them on just because it's quite a messy step. So it's just easier I find it anyway, easier to do like that. So now I finished off and glued everything onto the miniature. The lenses I've just done exactly the same as the infantry, so I'm not going to bother showing that in this video. I wanted to glue it all together so I could do the finishing touches on the tank as a whole. So the first thing was to get some more of that dark rust paint and just paint in a few darker chips. And we're talking here, you know, a very, very, probably less than 10%, maybe 5% of the area that I had previously chipped using that yellowish rust. I'm going to do using the dark rust. And generally it will only be in areas that I already have some of that lighter coloured chipping. And on the black, if you're thinking any of that chipping looks sort of brighter than Eshin, that's because it is. I went in with a little bit of Dawnstone as well, just to make it jump out a little bit more. And then the weapons, I just give them an oil wash here because they hadn't had any of the oil wash yet. So this is just the sepia oil wash that we used from earlier. And then I've taken dark rust. So same name, completely different paint. This is an oil paint. And I'm just giving the exhausts a little wash of that. Again, just to change the finish on them and get a slightly brighter orange in there as well. And I thought I'd put a little bit of it on the dozer blade too. Probably wouldn't bother doing that again, but I love how it looks on black, so I did it. Did it anyway. And then a bit of scorching. So on the exhausts and particularly on the flamers on the sponsons, I'm just spraying Agrax Earthshade here. Now I've not thinned it with anything. I'm still spraying about 20 psi, and all I'm going to do is slowly build this up over the flamers and over the exhausts to create that sort of scorched look on it. All I would say with this is use the air from your airbrush to help dry the paint as you go, and just don't be spraying wet paint on top of drying paint. Just wait till it's dry before you do that next layer. Otherwise, you sort of it forms like a skin, and you move it around, and it looks horrible. And then the last bit of scorching here, I thinned down some model color black, and I'm doing these little vents at the side. I don't know what they are, but I figure maybe they're a bit scorchy, so I put a bit of black on there, and then tips of the exhaust, tips of the flamer, tips of the assault cannon. just to give it a little bit of life. And I think because it's quite a simple miniature, you know, that red armour, I've chosen not to paint all the details differently. I like the idea that they're all red. It's a very deliberate choice. It means that we can have a bit of fun getting some other colours in elsewhere and doing a few little gimmicky effects like the scorching. And then one of my favourite things to use, and I don't get to use it anywhere near as much as I'd like to, is the old graphite stick. So this is just this pencil edge graphite stick. And I'm just going to go around the edges here and, well, put some of the graphite on them. Gives them a nice silvery finish. It's got a nice point on it which allows you to go around things like these hatches and just sort of get in there. Just give it just gives a lovely, lovely subtle metallic shine to it. And I just thought of areas of high wear and tear is where I've done it. So, you know, obviously done an awful lot of that light coloured chipping anyway. But I did think this was worthwhile. And, you know, this is a 5-minute job, and I think it's well worth the time for that little point of difference. Probably not going to notice it from 3 foot away, but certainly when it's on your shelf and you're looking at it, you know, or in your hand, you will notice that. And then the last stage now of the whole thing is to put a little bit of dirt on the tracks so that they match the basing that I've done for my infantry. So for this, I used the same powders that I'd used on there. So metal slag, which is basically just a dark brown one here. You could use something like burnt umber. And I've thinned it down into a wash, this pigment, using airbrush thinner. And I'm just going to wash that all over the tracks. Now this will dull them right down again. Because for some reason they're a bit glossy. I'm assuming that's the contrast paint has given them that slightly glossy finish. The silver powders that were in them definitely worked well though, because it gave them a little sparkle, which was cool. And then I'm using light sienna here, which is the other pigment I used on the bases for the infantry. Mix that up into a wash, and then just a few little sort of sparing blobs of that here and there, whilst that previous layer is still wet. And it'll just mix together, and when it dries, you get this nice sort of dusty finish. As I say, just to help it help tie it into the infantry miniatures. So there we are. The Predator is done. As I say, it comes together really quickly once you've got that main armor stage done and dusted. I'm going to stick it up next to the Lehman Russ as well, because obviously that's a tank miniature I've painted recently, so it's nice to compare the two. Again, similar techniques used on them, but with a few sort of key differences, and I think they have ended up looking quite different. But I think next to the infantry, I love how it's come out, and I am disappointed about the orange peel stuff and all that on the plastic, but I'm really glad I finished it, because I still think it looks really fun. I'm really, really pleased with how it's come out. Of that sort of time versus effort versus reward, I think is spot on for army painting. For me, vehicles should still be centerpieces. I know that you can run squadrons of these and stuff at 28mm scale, 32mm scale, but for me, I want my Bile Predator to be a real centerpiece of an army, because it's just so cool. And really, the only reason it is taking longer is because it's bigger. We compare it to the infantry miniatures. It's not got many more things to paint on it, different things to paint. The red armor, silver on the weapons, bit of yellow, and then I suppose the additional bits. So yes, you have the tracks, you have the multi-melter, you have the exhaust cowlings, things like that. But they're fun to paint, which is great, and they have, I think, quite big impact. And individually, in and of themselves, they're not complicated. They're nice, simple sort of. You're getting that done in a hobby session, which again for me is, I love it when I'm painting my army stuff to achieve something within a session, regardless of the time. If I've only got 10 minutes, I'll pick a job that I can do in 10 minutes, ideally. I just find it helps keep me more motivated, and I think that would probably be my biggest feelings on army painting is spend time on the bits that matter to you, the techniques that matter to you, the things that you like the look of, not necessarily what you is perceived as what you should spend the time on, or the things you do have to do. Because again, painting an army, particularly an army to a high level, is a huge thing to do. It's a massive endeavor, and I think you have to enjoy yourself whilst you're doing it. not just the outcome at the end. I certainly do feel that way. And so far, this has ticked the boxes. Now, I don't really know what to do next with these guys, because I'm sort of winging this a bit, this army series, because of things various people have asked for in comments or when I've spoken to when I've been at shows and stuff like that. But I wondered if you'd be interested in me doing a character model to sort of finish it off. So an army painting series now would include the infantry, a vehicle or a monster or whatever, depending on what the army is, and a character. And then hopefully that would serve as a really useful little sort of textbook of recipes and ideas that you can take away and copy or take inspiration from, or whatever it is you want to do with them. So let me know in the comments if you think it's worth doing a character, and also let me know if it's worth doing it 3 weeks on the trot, or whether it's nicer to have a little break and then we'll do the character sort of in a few weeks. I would really appreciate your guys' feedback on that side of it. But yeah, that's it. Bile Predator ticked off, so not bad. A month. I've done a first ever Lehman Russ, a first ever Bile Predator, and actually the first Predator I've painted since I was about 12. I had the original plastic one that looked a lot like this, but with the autocannon. Painted that as an Iron Warrior, a Khorne dedicated Iron Warrior. Any questions about anything I've done, pop them down in the comments. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks ever so much for all your support. Take care. I'll see you next time. If you've liked any of the models in this video and you fancy having an army of them yourself, but perhaps you don't have the time or wherewithal to get it done, consider dropping us an email at commissions@cultofpaint.com, and maybe Ben can sort you out.